Hey everyone. Have you ever just stop and think about all the mysteries in the world? I mean, like people just vanishing. It's like a thought that kind of creeps me out. But it's also super fascinating.
It is, isn't it? I think it really shows how much we as humans need to understand the world around us.
Hmm.
When something happens that we can't explain, it just makes us question everything.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what we're doing today, diving deep into these unsolved disappearances from the book Stephen King's Vanished. We're going to look closely at 5 cases where people just poof, disappeared, left behind all these questions, no answers.
The really strange thing is that we often have, like, no evidence, which just leads to even more theories about what happened.
Okay, so let's get into it. First up, Amelia Earhart. Everyone knows her, right? Famous pilot. But the thing that really draws us in is that last flight of hers. 1937, she wants to fly around the whole world, super ambitious, and then nothing. Silence.
Yeah, and then the questions start. What happened to her and her navigator, Fred Noonan, out there over the Pacific? The simplest answer is crash and sink, right? Plane runs out of fuel, goes down, no one survives. Makes sense, but maybe a little too simple for a mystery this big, don't you think?
Right. And that's where the other theories come in. Like, what about the Nikomaro hypothesis? This one says that maybe they landed on this tiny island called Nikomaro. And get this, maybe they survived for a bit on the island. People think some bones found. There might even be Earharts.
It's definitely possible. I mean, the evidence isn't totally clear, but it
Ah.
really makes you wonder, did they survive the crash only to be stuck on this island? It's a crazy thought.
It is, like a survival movie or something. But wait, there's another theory that throws a whole new wrench in things. What if she was captured by the Japanese? This theory says that maybe she wasn't just a pilot but a spy, and the Japanese military caught her.
It's an interesting theory, especially because at that time, Japan's military was growing stronger in the Pacific. What if they did capture her? Maybe even kept her prisoner on Saipan Island. It's all circumstantial, but it does make things even more mysterious.
Okay, so 3 main theories. Each one has evidence for and against it. It's like a puzzle where some pieces are missing and some might not even belong.
And that's what makes a good mystery so good. It makes us think really hard about the evidence and accept that maybe we'll never know for sure.
From a pilot lost at sea to one of the most famous heists ever, let's switch gears to D.B. Cooper. This guy jumped out of a plane with $200,000 and disappeared.
I know it's a crazy story, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
In 1971, this guy, calling himself Dan Cooper, hijacks a Boeing 727, very calmly asks for the money, and then jumps out in the middle of a storm somewhere over Washington state.
What an exit. The FBI searched everywhere, but Cooper, whoever he was, just vanished. It's like he just melted into the wilderness, left everyone wondering.
The really interesting thing is how different the theories are. Some people think he was a total survival expert who planned everything perfectly and is living it up somewhere with all that cash.
Right, like he outsmarted everyone, living the dream on a beach somewhere.
But parachuting into a storm in the wilderness?
Yeah.
That's insanely dangerous. He could easily died, and his body's still out there somewhere.
And then there's the money. A few years later, some of it was found buried along the Columbia River. Where's the rest? Did he even have it with him when he jumped? Just more questions.
It definitely makes you think, did he hide the rest somewhere before he jumped, or did he lose it on the way down? It's a detail that keeps everyone guessing.
So 2 main ideas. Criminal mastermind or tragic ending? Which one do you think is more likely?
It's a tough one. Part of me wants to believe he's out there somewhere, but realistically, the odds were totally against him. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Okay, moving on from a daring heist to something a lot darker. The Sodder children. Imagine this. It's Christmas Eve, 1945, and a house catches fire in West Virginia. 5 kids, all asleep upstairs, vanish.
Awful, right? But it gets worse. No bodies were found in the wreckage. So obviously people got suspicious and started coming up with all sorts of theories, each one creepier than the last.
Kidnapping. Why would someone take 5 kids on Christmas Eve and then burn the house down? It's scary to think about, and that's just one of the ideas about what happened.
Some people say the fire was so hot it completely destroyed the children's bodies. But that's not really possible. Fires can destroy evidence, but it's almost impossible to get rid of all the bones.
And then there's the mafia theory. Some people think the kids were taken to get back at their dad, George Sodder. He was very outspoken against Mussolini and the Italian fascists.
They think maybe the mafia, who were known to be in West Virginia, wanted to silence George Sodder and send a message to anyone else who spoke out against them.
And here's the crazy part. Years later, the family gets a photo in Avail that supposedly shows one of their sons as a young man. It's like a cruel reminder that the case is still open and that maybe they could still find their kids or at least find out what happened.
That picture was never proven to be one of the Sodder children. but it kept people talking about the case for years.
It really shows how sometimes, even after a terrible tragedy, we might never know the truth. It's a story that leaves you with more questions than answers and makes you think about the worst parts of human nature and the power of hope.
And it shows just how limited forensic science was back then. Because there wasn't enough evidence from the fire, all these theories were able to pop up, making it even harder to know what really happened to the Sodder children.
All right, now we're going way back in time to one of America's oldest mysteries, the lost colony of Roanoke. 1587, over 100 English settlers land on Roanoke Island off the coast of what's now North Carolina. They want to start a permanent English colony.
John White, the governor, sails back to England to get supplies. He leaves his daughter Eleanor and granddaughter Virginia there, the first English baby born in America. 3 years later, when he comes back, the whole colony is empty. The houses are still there, but everyone's gone.
Talk about spooky. The only thing White found was one word carved into a post. Croatomanen. No other clues, no signs of a struggle, just that one word.
And that one word has kept people guessing for centuries. People still go to Roanoke Island looking for answers. Did they join the Croatoan tribe like the word suggests?
Or were they attacked by another tribe? Did they try to escape by sea and get lost in the Atlantic? Because there's no evidence these questions have lingered for centuries. It's a reminder of how difficult it was to start new settlements back then.
This case isn't just about missing people. It's about a missing piece of history. Those colonists were pioneers, and because they vanished, there's this gap in our understanding of how America was colonized. It's like someone ripped a page out of a history book.
And the mystery still captures our imagination because it's so historically significant. It reminds us that even in a world of technology and information, there are still secrets from the past that we may never uncover.
The Roanoke colony is also a reminder of how hard it was to survive in a new and dangerous place.
Mhm.
The colonists faced so many threats, from diseases to starvation to conflicts with Native American tribes. Their disappearance shows just how fragile life was in those early days.
Okay, for our final case in part one of this deep dive, let's head to a remote island in Scotland and a lighthouse where something really strange happened. The Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers. In 1900, all 3 keepers just vanished, poof, gone.
The setting is part of what makes it so eerie. The Flannan Isles are a bunch of rocky, windswept islands way out in the North Atlantic. And the lighthouse is perched on a cliff, just this lonely structure against the sea. It's isolated, and then you add in the sudden disappearance of the keepers, and you have a mystery that has lasted for over 100 years.
Imagine you're on a ship passing by, and you notice the lighthouse is dark. When people finally get to the island, they find it deserted. The table set for a meal no one ate. The bed's unmade. The clock stopped. It's like time froze and everyone just disappeared.
And then there's the logbook. The last entry, December 15th, 1900. Storm-ended sea. Calm God is over all. But here's the thing. There were no storms reported in the area at that time. Weather logs from other islands and ships say it was calm.
So what was the keeper talking about? Something supernatural, a premonition. The logbook gives us this peek into their last days, but it just raises more questions than answers. Makes you wonder what happened on that desolate island.
And to make things even stranger, the lighthouse was in perfect order. Lamps, clean equipment, maintained no signs of a struggle. Seems like they left willingly, but why?
Was it a freak wave that swept all 3 of them away? Did being so isolated drive them crazy and they tried to escape?
We'll look at those theories and more in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we left off with those lighthouse keepers on the Flannan Isles just gone. We talked about a few ideas, like a rogue wave maybe, or they lost their minds from being alone for so long. But let's go back to the evidence, or I guess the lack of it.
Exactly. The weirdest thing is that there's just no clear explanation. The lighthouse was spotless, which makes you think there wasn't a fight or anything like that.
Right, and the weather reports say it was calm, so a giant wave doesn't really fit either. It's like something really bizarre happened that just doesn't make sense.
It's that gap between what we can prove and what we can only imagine, That's what makes this so interesting. Some theories even get into, paranormal stuff. Sea monsters, maybe, or ghost ships.
I can see why people would think that way when there are no other answers. But I'm more of a science person myself, even if it seems unlikely. And that's what makes these conversations fun. Everyone has their own ideas. What about you? What really stands out to you about this case?
Honestly, it's those logbook entries that really freak me out, especially that last one about a storm that never happened. It's like looking into the mind of someone who's losing it, Makes me think about how being isolated can mess with your head even if you're used to it.
That's a really good point. There's actually a name for that kind of thing. Island cabin fever. People get paranoid. They start seeing things. Sometimes they even get violent.
Wow, I had no idea. So are you saying that maybe one of the keepers snapped and hurt the others?
Well, I can't say for sure, but it's definitely a possibility. Being all alone out there, the harsh environment, maybe some underlying mental health issues, it could all add up to a pretty bad situation.
Okay, well, that's a pretty disturbing thought. So let's move on from the Flannan Isles for now, even though it's such a captivating mystery. As we wrap up our deep dive into Stephen King's Vanished, I think it's important to look at what connects all these cases. What makes them so fascinating even after decades, sometimes centuries?
Well, the main thing is the lack of closure, right? Humans, we need answers. We want things to make sense. But these stories just end abruptly, leaving us feeling unsettled and wanting more.
You're right, it's not just about wanting to know what happened, it's about needing to know to feel like we understand the world again.
Exactly. And that need is what leads to so many theories. We see it with every case from Earhart's disappearance. Did she crash or was she captured? To D.B. Cooper, did he survive or die in the wilderness?
Our minds don't like emptiness, so we fill it up with possibilities, even if they don't seem very likely. We try to make sense of chaos, even if it means guessing and making stuff up.
And we can't forget the human element. These aren't just puzzles. They involve real people, people who had families and dreams that were cut short. You can't help but feel for the people they left behind, who are still dealing with the uncertainty and the pain of not knowing.
That's what makes these stories so haunting. Any one of us could disappear, leaving our loved ones to try and figure out what happened, searching for answers that might never come.
It's a scary thought.
Uh.
And I think it speaks to a fear we all have. Deep down, the fear of the unknown, of things we can't control, of how fragile life really is.
So if we all want answers and closure, why do we keep coming back to these unsolved mysteries? Isn't it kind of like torturing ourselves with stories that might never have a good ending?
That's a great question. I think it's because even though we don't get all the answers, these mysteries offer us something really profound. They give us a glimpse into the abyss, you know. They show us that there's so much we don't know and can't control. They make us reevaluate our place in the universe.
I like it, a glimpse into the abyss. It's like looking into a dark room. You know, something's there, but you can't see it clearly. It makes us want to explore, to understand, even if we never quite get there.
And I think there's another reason, maybe a more subconscious one. It taps into this desire we have to escape, to reinvent ourselves. The idea of disappearing, of leaving everything behind, it's appealing, especially when the world feels overwhelming.
So you're saying we kind of connect with these missing people, even if what happened to them was terrible.
Yeah. We imagine what it would be like to be free from everything. It's just a fantasy, of course, but it's a powerful one. That's why these stories stay with us.
That makes a lot of sense. We're drawn to the mystery, but also to the idea of escaping that it represents. It's a complicated reaction, but it shows how these stories can really get to us.
And we can't forget how the media keeps these mysteries alive. Books, documentaries, podcasts like this one, they all keep these cases in the public eye, making sure people keep searching for answers.
True, the media really shapes how we see and think about these mysteries. It shows how the stories we tell and how we tell them can really affect how we understand the world.
And speaking of understanding, what about you listening right now? What are your thoughts on all this? Which case stuck with you the most?
Yeah, tell us, what intrigues you about these mysteries? What theories do you believe? And most importantly, why do you think we're so drawn to stories about people who vanish without a trace? Think about that as we get ready to wrap things up in part 3. So we've spent this deep dive looking into these unsolved disappearances, and it really makes you think about how much we don't know about the world.
Yeah, it's like we've been trying to peek behind a curtain, getting these little glimpses of something huge and mysterious.
Totally. We might never know exactly what happened in these cases, but just trying to figure it out, looking at the evidence and considering all the possibilities, that's what keeps it so interesting.
I agree. It's that process of putting together the pieces, trying to make sense of the unexplainable that really draws you in.
So let's go back over what we've talked about. We started with Amelia Earhart, the amazing pilot who vanished over the Pacific. She left behind so many questions and clues that have led people on this wild goose chase for decades.
Right. And then there was D.B. Cooper, the guy who hijacked a plane, jumped out with all that money and just disappeared.
Hmm?
Did he pull it off and live the secret life, or was it all for nothing? We still don't know.
And we can't forget the Sodder children, those poor kids who disappeared from their burning house on Christmas Eve. Such a sad story with so many unanswered questions and the suspicion that something really bad happened.
We also went way back in time to the lost colony of Roanoke, an entire settlement that vanished without a trace. All that's left is that one word, Kerwo Eton. It's a mystery that shows how dangerous life was for early colonists and how much we still don't know about the past.
And in part two, we talked about the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers. Three men just gone from their isolated post, a perfectly kept lighthouse, and a logbook entry about a storm that never happened.
5 cases from all over the world, each one different but all connected by this idea of a disappearance that we just can't explain.
So as we wrap things up, let's go back to that question we asked earlier. Why are we still so fascinated by these unsolved mysteries, even though information is so easy to find these days?
I think deep down we all have this need to understand the world around us. And when something happens that we just can't explain, it makes us question everything we thought we knew.
It's like these mysteries show us that our view of the world isn't perfect. There are things happening that we might never understand.
And maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not in control of everything, that there's still so much out there that we don't know. And that can be exciting and a little scary too.
I think you're right. It's not always about getting a clear answer. Sometimes it's okay to just sit with the mystery and accept that we might never know the whole truth.
Exactly. It's about realizing that the world is much weirder and more amazing than we often think. And sometimes the best stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
So what do we do with all of this? Do we just give up and say, oh, well, some things will always be a mystery?
Well, that's up to each person. Some people are okay with not knowing, while others might feel like they need to keep searching for answers.
And both of those are fine, right?
Yeah.
It's about finding what interests you, what makes you curious, and what keeps you engaged with the world.
Absolutely. If there's one thing these cases have taught us, it's that the search for knowledge and understanding never really ends.
That's a nice thought, isn't it? It means there will always be more mysteries to uncover, more stories to tell, and new ways of looking at things.
And who knows? Maybe one day we'll finally get the answers to these cases. But until then, let's enjoy the mystery and remember to always stay curious.
I love that. A huge thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into Stephen King's Vanished. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Remember, the world is full of mysteries just waiting to be discovered. Keep asking questions, keep searching, and never stop exploring.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious.